I'm not tempted.
Hey there, and welcome to the AI Digest. My name is Joaquin Melara, and I'm your host. With me today is Xe Iaso, and Z is um, a really special guest. We've actually tried to record this podcast three times now, and we just enjoy talking so much that it ends up devolving into some other conversation. But I think this time is third time's the charm, and
Third
we're gonna
time's the
make it
charm.
work. Uh, so Z, you're a senior technical philosopher at Fly.io, and to me that sounds like a fancy title. I think you're sitting on a rock somewhere thinking about how to engineer the next computer program or put some composite hardware software solution together. Can you give us a little bit of clarity as to what it means to be a techno philosopher?
Well, first of all, you don't see the thinking on a rock per se. We have chairs now. Um, but in general, I chose this job title because number one, job titles are kind of arbitrary as it is. And I'm at the point in my career where it doesn't really matter. And number two, I can't call myself an engineer in the province of Ontario where I live. So, like, the nominal title for the position I do would be like developer relations engineer or something. And not only is that just not what I'd like, uh, I think it's not a funny title, so I chose the title senior techno philosopher because it has like 8 syllables or something.
There's some gravitas there, right?
Oh yeah.
Some level of I gotta approach this person with caution because they have a lot of knowledge.
I mean, I've heard that sometimes it scares people away, sometimes it makes people curious, and then other times they're like, "Oh, this is gonna be something," and then they're like, "Oh, this is gonna be something."
Well, I can attest to the something's there. So you've been in this role for how long?
I've been working at Fly.io for about 5 months. I think it'll be 5 months on the 8th of April. Yeah, somewhere like that. I've worked in the industry for close to, if not more than a decade.
And even though you've been in this role for 5 months, you are a prolific writer, photographer. You're constantly developing your own programs to keep yourself entertained and explore ideas. You're just a creative person overall, and that creativity bleeds into writing and developing things that sort of make these creative statements, this artistic expression as to how the world and the society is shaping out, right?
Yeah, that's what I try to do. Sometimes you have to be a bit more explicit about it because if you're I subscribe to the tool that if you have to be explicit about what you're doing in order for it to make sense, you've failed. But sometimes you do have to give people the subtle thing and then hammer it in with the with your intention. Otherwise, people will get the wrong intention and then start like being very angry about it on whatever we call Twitter now.
And in that line of thinking, I mean, it also jumps into comedy. If you have to tell a joke and explain it, then it's not that funny, right? Part of the humor is that there's a context that the audience can share in.
Yeah, sometimes it can make more things more funny if people don't get the joke, but it depends like all things.
So tell me a little bit about Fly.io. I mean, we were skating around the surface with your job title, and you've been there 5 months, but clearly the developer relations is a area that not a lot of people may be aware of, and it has such a wide reaching impact on an organization as a unit, their business development, customer service, supporting further extension of their product offering. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a, you know, techno philosopher in that capacity?
A lot of what I'm do professionally is find interesting ways to use the product. Fly.io is it lets you it's I had a detailed thing thought up and then it just popped off the stack. Well,
It's a
basically,
platform.
you take your application and you have it run somewhere, and that somewhere can be any one of like 35 data centers in the world. And one command to deploy it to one data center, one command to deploy it to 35 data centers. And they all run as micro VMs with Firecracker. Your program gets put up into a Docker image, gets put to those servers somewhere. It runs, and you can access it from anywhere in the world, and it uses the entire internet as its load balancer between the different regions.
So what you're trying to say is that there is a means of deploying your application in one place and having it be relatively fast in any other instance of the deployment centers of the world.
Yeah. So if you're in Toronto and your application is deployed to Toronto, Seattle, and Frankfurt, your users in Toronto will hit the Toronto data center without any extra configuration on your end because it uses BGP anycasting to use the entire internet as a load balancer.
So this is a hosting solution for applications as well as a platform as a service, right? Sort of to
Yeah, the
augment
platform
your.
as a service is actually implemented client side, which is the thing that makes it difficult to talk about because it's not a platform as a service, even though you could look at it and conclude that it is one.
Would infrastructure as a service be more appropriate? That it does some
Yeah,
auto magic things in the background.
infrastructure as a service with a happy path for things that serve HTTP.
Otherwise, you would be configuring each individual data center and making sure that it's a positive experience according to the markets that you're in or who's using your product.
Basically.
Mm.
The automatic region selection also goes to other things like Tigris, S3 like, except your data is actually globally distributed. So if you are in Toronto and you request from the Fly data center in Toronto, the Tigris data will be serving from Toronto and uploading to Toronto, which is really convenient.
And for this platform, I mean, you said it's so sublimely easy to use. You yourself, as part of your occupation, develop projects on top of it just for the sake of getting a giggle out of yourself and being able to explain to a customer, here's how you can use a platform, how
Yep.
you can extend or manage your existing offerings in a better way.
Yep.
um, can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects you built? In particular, I think we were talking about one you did for April Fool's Day.
Yeah. Among the things I have on there, I have my blog. I have a caching. I have like the old version of the caching CDN thing for before I switched to Tigris for everything. But on April Fools, I released a project that uses a large language model to have a Chat GPT like interface. But to spoil it, after about 5 messages, it starts injecting a new system prompt to tell the bot to only talk about the health benefits of vegetables. And I went out of my way to design, an entirely functional Chat GPT like interface. And, you send messages, you click enter, it generates a response, it puts the response back in your thing. And I just have it start talking. I just have the AI go off the rails and start talking about the health benefits of vegetables. You'll just be having a normal conversation, and you'll be like, "Wait, what did I just ask you?" And it would say celery. It's great.
So it really makes you think about who's in control of the dialogue, right?
Oh yeah, like that whole thing I put together was like maybe an afternoon of coding. The UX is kind of crap, and anytime it errors, it just starts over and forgets your conversation, even though it's visible on the client side because I am very good at programming. But
I think
It's
I think it
it's
further adds to the joke. It's like senile, vegetable driven dialogues that seem to make some competency sense and
I
devolve back
guess
into.
I didn't think about it like that, but you know, I am happy to subscribe to the it's a feature style of comedy, but I use the same AI backend and stuff for a bunch of other things too.
And what other things have you created? I know you've been running a blog for how long now? You've been running it for a couple years now, right?
I It feels like it, but the ChatGPT API only actually opened up like March last year.
No,
Yeah.
your personal
Oh, my
blogging.
personal blog? Yeah, my personal blog doesn't use AI basically at all. My personal blog is really boring. It's just a bunch of complicated wrappers around a static site generator with some automatically generated data in the Git repo that people can pull requests to. It's not super exciting, but the other thing that I reuse the AI model for is this thing I wrote called Arsene. It is cryptocurrency horoscopes. Or I when I made it, I kind of wanted to play with the idea of the dead internet theory. And TLDR, the dead internet theory is if you go on the internet to talk to other humans, it's impossible because everything is made by bots. And I made that cryptocurrency horoscope things because, well, with the ChatGPT API and other open weights large language models, we have the ability to do that. So, what would that look like? And it turns out that the SEO side of the internet beat me to the punch because now we all know what it looks like. Whenever you Google for anything, you just get these randomly nonsense, useless results. And I hate it. But
I thought it was pretty funny that the way you described the crypto price fluctuations were so unpredictable that you might as well bake it under a horoscope program and then give you tarot card
oh,
readings.
yeah, that's that's what the thing that really inspired me to make it was this. I remember this old stand-up comedy line. I don't remember from where, but it said that it was like something about financial analysis and horoscopes being in the same section of the newspaper because they're the same thing. So, like, as somebody who has actually legitimately diagnosed Kubernetes clusters with tarot cards before, I thought it would be funny to see what the large language models would do. And it turns out that they do actually write pretty convincing horoscopes. There, it's just kind of hilarious.
At some point, you said the volatility lent itself to paint a better story, and you were going to find a way to combine the pricing or changes in prices with the tarot card to give you a fully customizable. Today, you know, you're a Sagittarius, and we've dipped down this much currency, and that's what it means for your future, your love life, or something like that.
I've been thinking about doing something like that. The only problem with it is I feel like it could get into kind of unethical places very quickly because even if you say, like nudge, nudge, wink, wink, this is all for entertainment,
Someone might
somebody's
take
going
it
to bet the
serious.
house on it. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. Too much
yeah, it's
liability under the guise of a joke.
like if the large language models were worse, it would probably work better as a joke. But the ironically, the problem is that large language models are too authoritative and convincing to most people. So, like, you have to qualify that something is a joke, and if I made it maximally qualify that it was a joke as you were before you started reading it, I feel like it would ruin the joke. So, like, there's this very careful balance of like, responsibility, comedy, and for lack of a better word, storytelling that comes into the mix because there's a lot that you can use to just poke fun at the absurdity of all of this.
There's that. This is the basis of our conversation for today, also, and I'm glad that you're talking about responsibility, and the fact that communication, even though it might not be malicious in intent, might have unintended consequences to the audience depending on their background and their understanding on any given situation. But with your career in technology, and now your role as a developer relations individual, you have to communicate deeply technical subject matter that might otherwise be inaccessible in a way that is accessible and support the adoption of your products.
Mhm. It's a really tough balance to fill. Like, I know that one of the things that I've been trying to do is finding ways to use these tools to empower people as ways to enhance existing workflows, as ways to give people a bit more precise, give people ways to automate things. But one of the really annoying problems is that when you deal with AI generated results, you just get the end result and you don't get any of the individual control or the like. Like when you get the AI to draw you a picture of a barista in serving coffee with the Space Needle visible out the window, you don't get individual layers like the color of the barista's hair or the color of the eyes without changing the entire image completely. And like, sure, you get something that can be used as a placeholder or something that can be used intermediately, but you don't have any of the professional control over it. You just have like ways to influence it, but not just that one thing. You influence the entire thing. And I kind of hate working with it sometimes.
Well, I think that's part of the reason why you retain your creative outputs on writing. So
Yeah.
something you can create a narrative, a overarching message, uh, put details behind it, and then make it funny or make it interesting. And that's why you also practice photography, because it's
Yeah.
something that gives you full control over every piece, every mechanical configuration of the device, and you also have to paint the perspective that you want to align with the and audience, right?
Yeah. At some level, like it's easy to look at, somebody holding up something absurd like this camera and, oh, there's a reflection of my light that I'm using to avoid the snow being too bright. Uh, it's easy to look at photography and just see it as somebody like pressing a button and getting a result, but the hard part goes into all of the creative decisions that are made around like when to press the button or what the scene should have. Is there something interesting in there? Is there something interesting about where you placed it? How deep is your field of view? Is the thing that you want to work on it that you want to focus on in focus? Um, like I've been on a spree of using old manual vintage lenses. So I've totally weaned myself off of autofocus, and now I find it difficult to use autofocus because I don't have that control. It's kind of like stable diffusion output in that way where I have, the ability to nudge the autofocus to focus on something in particular. But when push comes to shove, I'm just going to manually focus and set the aperture so that I know exactly what is in focus and I can get the shot perfect every time.
I think this is a very broad statement as to how we work as a society. I mean, you're talking about the usage of photography equipment.
Mhm.
People that are otherwise uninitiated into the world of photography don't appreciate that equipment has capabilities, and those capabilities allow you to do or not do certain things. They give you constraints. You can buy hardware like lenses and buy
Yeah.
modifications for the lenses and have either manual film,
Yeah.
so chemical base, or digital or not non-digital. Like there's so many variations to the equipment, not to mention the picture taking mechanism itself or the technique behind it,
Yeah.
whether you have long exposure, short exposure, whether you
The
open the
shutter
aperture.
speed,
Mhm.
the aperture, and actually, with modern mirrorless sensors, you have the ability to customize how sensitive the sensor is to light. And the setting the ISO like that is also a fairly important thing, even though realistically, like for the 99.999% of the case, the camera can actually do the ISO correctly. There are a couple times when you need to manually change it when the camera is wrong, but it's in very specific cases at this point. They've had decades to make it basically perfect.
And since photography is the art of capturing light, knowing the underlying principles and mechanisms allow you to break the rules of normal
Mhm.
photography as well. Some people they take long exposure in dark areas and they fling around light
Yeah.
sources. And they can create moving paintings. So
Yeah, that's another thing that's really fun. Other times are, like, when you have a CRT in the thing, CRTs, normally, the human eye is actually surprisingly bad at capturing light and displaying images, and your brain does a lot of hallucination to fill in the gaps. So, most people can't see a CRT getting refreshed. There are a few people that can, especially as you get used to higher refresh rate monitors and if you do a lot of rhythm games like I do. But the camera, you have to adjust the shutter speed to match the frequency of the CRT. Otherwise, you will get black lines racing up and down the screen. And it's like 1 over 60 in NTSC regions and sometimes 1 over 50 in PAL regions. But there's weird cases like Brazil where it's 60 hertz PAL. I don't know how that happened.
Brazilians are fast. That's all I know. In their language and their culture. But you know, just this seemingly innocent topic of photography, we're only playing around with some trivial concepts here.
Oh,
If we were
yeah.
to talk about the deep guts of it, we can talk about it for hours. But
Oh, yeah.
if we look at AI, as you said, you detest the fact that it's just kind of a press a button or do a very low level engagement with the machine, and it doesn't give you control over how you can manipulate different aspects of that value chain creation, right?
Okay, more pedantically, since somebody's probably going to call it out in the comments, with things like Comfy UI and Stable Diffusion, Comfy UI is like a modular synthesizer arrangement for the different parts of Stable Diffusion. And with things like Comfy UI, you can actually get into the guts of it and do a much more custom workflow to allow for image to image stuff. Like to take that picture of the path that I took as a throwaway test image that people love for some reason and turn it into, like an anime, like an painting in an anime style with a character looking towards the camera and smiling and such. But in order to do that, you need to have you need to have pictures of mannequins that are pre-rigged to the pose you want, or you need to go in with a 3D editor and make the pose and the like. But you don't get control over the individual parts of the output. You can only really control the input. And being able to control the input is nice and all, but like being able to control the output is the real thing that sets like a lot of professional work apart from. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just the main thing that lets you have like control over the totality of the result.
But this is exactly in the same line as photography.
Yeah.
Amateurs have a point and click where you can have a camera that you can zoom in and zoom out, and you press a button and it captures it. There are some mechanisms that auto balance the light source and clarify where the faces are and help an everyday untrained consumer be able to meet a certain level of expectations that they have that is
Mhm.
acceptable. Like I'm perfectly fine taking pictures of my family or my girlfriend or a mountain, and I'll be happy. Some people are not just happy with taking pictures of a subject. For them to be considered a professional and be paid for that, they need to finally manipulate every inner function
Yeah.
to ensure that the output meets the expectations or requirements of the client or the person engaging that task, right?
Yeah. For the record, I do use my iPhone for photography a fair bit. I learned most of the technique that I know for photography on my phone because it's the camera that's on you. Like, realistically, for 99% of people, a phone camera is way more than enough, especially with the latest advancements that Apple has made with their optics. Like, they managed to take a sensor the size of, I don't know, um, a dime. I think I can still use the dime as a reference, the United States dime or the euro 10-cent coin, and they are able to get some pretty decent results, but it's doesn't quite hit the same when you have a sensor that's the size of a 35 millimeter sheet of film. And like it's a big chunky sensor because it needs to be, because you need to capture light. And if it's not big enough, you just can't capture enough light. It's just how it is. There's ways to work around it by introducing optics to refocus the light or whatever. But
There's a physical constraint on that function.
yeah,
But we can take that and bring it to what people are calling prompt engineering, right? I mean, you give a question or you give a particular context, and the answer is inadequate. It doesn't have enough context, or maybe it's slightly off the line of the subject that you're looking for.
yeah,
Then you can chain that prompt to generate what would feel like a more precise output, a fine-tuned output. And that sort of
yeah.
mirrors along the lines of what you were saying with that image tool that allows you to create a
Comfy UI, yeah.
comfy UI. You can create a specified set of instructions that give you incremental more bits of control throughout that value chain from input to output.
Yeah, Comfy UI, for the record, is like a marvel of engineering, and I really love it. Even though I'm not sure how I feel about AI generated illustrations as a whole, like Comfy UI basically requires that you get into the guts and play with it. And it's been making me wonder, like, is art the final result, or is art more of like the process that you use to get there, and other deep philosophical things that it it's going to sound like I'm conflicted because I'm basically displaying several opposing views at the same time, but I am kind of conflicted because at some level this stuff is really cool, but at the other level, like, it feels weird with how the things were created, and just the how there's this gulf of where control ends, and in order to fix like the result of stable diffusion, you actually have to have the skills of an artist to go in and redo some of the things. I had some stuff. I am actually kind of formally trained in art, I guess, and I have gone in for most of the Stable Diffusion illustrations I put on my blog. I've gone in and manually edited a fair chunk of the canvas to remove some artifacting, to remove some cases of random floating strains of hair. I don't think I've gotten all of them over the years. You can probably find some that I've missed. The fact that you don't have the layers or the color palettes that were used makes it really annoying and difficult, because you have to sample colors, then like play with the color and deband the color, and it's kind of a nightmare. It would be a lot easier if there was a lot more precise control of the results, but there's this wall of control that ends when the thing is being inferenced. And this is something you see with language models too. It's just language models look easier to edit because, it's just text. You can use control F and make and mine your way through it, but it still is difficult. And when you try to do that for long enough, you start to get this sixth sense of, huh, this reads like large language model output.
You also said something interesting that when we reach levels where we can interpret reality, we hallucinate to fill in the gaps.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's what you're talking about when you say that we might get incremental improvements. But I think the wide adoption of this technology is that people seemingly hallucinate, and the thing hallucinates, but the person and the machine are both bullshitting each other to make it feel like it's more of a human, more of an entity than it actually is.
Yeah. Ironically enough, telling in the system prompt of your large language model thing, if you tell the model that it has sentience and qualia, then that will actually greatly improve the output of your results on some benchmarks. We're not sure why, because there's that black box of not understanding. You can understand the individual bits of math, how the transformer architecture works, and how the context window works, and how the token selection filters through all the different layers of parameters. But you can understand the parts, but not how A got to B. And it's kind of frustrating at a level. Like, it's really good for getting that text, but the process of writing is not just, vomiting words out onto a page. It's the intention that goes into it. And I don't know.
So, are you suggesting we get life coaches for ChatGPT so that we can improve their quality?
That would make a good April Fool's Day gag. Um,
Get a
that might
seemingly
also work in my series of my satire series about the industry.
get a seemingly scientific paper discussing the benefits of framing positive reinforcement in your prompts, and then having an entire discipline spin off of that.
I mean, we're probably seeing that discipline spin off already in what people in the self-described prompt engineers. I not just because I can't call myself the E word in Ontario, but I kind of dislike that name because I think a better name for it is scrying. And when you scry, you look into the unseeable and try to see something and make an inference as to what's going on. And I feel like that's a bit more accurate for what prompt engineering is doing. You are scrying into the unseeable to try to divine a better result, where better has some definition that makes sense in context.
Well, let's talk about comedy as a means of making things better, and as being a vehicle of transporting ideas that are otherwise inaccessible in
Yeah.
an inaccessible vehicle.
Yeah. So comedy is one of those things that sound easy because, you go to YouTube, you can find something that'll make you laugh pretty easily. But comedy is surprisingly difficult because of how easy it is to accidentally offend people with comedy. And professionally, when I do developer relation stuff and I do talks, sometimes even about very serious things, I'll work comedy into there, not only just to help break the tension, but also to help portray things like absurdity or whatnot. I have a series on my blog of stories where I invented a fake startup, and I have a rule that I am never allowed to explain any product or service that startup provides. And, you're smiling because you already can think of at least 8 companies that do that. And,
Just corporate
they
corporate talk blender, right?
yeah, a corporate talk blender that just somehow happens to make enough money to hire expensive developers that do something. Um, and when I write about it, I also like scramble the names of things like Google Meet becomes E100 Meet, or there's Slacker News or Z Combinator or something. And I basically have misadventures with sometimes well-defined, sometimes throwaway characters as they go through the motions of madness. When I was having some health issues and the Ottawa health system, I found out that the Ottawa health system is very close to collapsing, especially in the therapy department. I I remember somebody was arguing on Twitter about we should just have AI therapists. That will solve everything and nobody will have to wait again. So I wrote a story about an AI therapist. And yeah, that one was fun. It or it was I wrote it mostly on my iPhone at 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, and it came out okay, I guess. I had to redesign my blog in order to get it across correctly because I wanted to have little chat bubbles to represent the chat of the conversation between the person and the robotherapist. So I effectively rewrote my blog engine from scratch just for that, and it has paid off because I've used that chat bubble component in other things. Like I have another story about a this person wakes up. He groggily walks over to his desk, and then he has a surprise one-on-one with his manager, and HR joins the call. And I have these three layers of text. I have the descriptions of what's going on with the protagonist James and the people in the call. I have the dialogue in quotes, and then I have the chat messages with James and one of his co-worker friends who's also getting laid off. So there's that three layers of separation, and like just being able to have that control is, like I said, it's good.
I
Although
see.
I'm pretty sure I did actually write that chat component with I think GPT 3.5 because I am very very bad at front end stuff. But if I have a Utah teapot that I can work off of, I can make something a little bit better. For context, the Utah teapot is a standard 3D model of a teapot that a lot of 3D models are derived from because it provides a way to avoid the terror of the blank canvas. And for many creative professionals, the blank canvas is actually terrifying.
I just want to say I really like you because in the way that you express yourself, there's a great level of care, of awareness of the far-reaching consequence of your actions. I mean, comedy is fun, but it can be a weapon. Comedy is a pervasive um, way of transporting an idea, and as you said, it needs to be culturally, socially sensitive, um, and particularly tuned to deliver the effect in communication of where and what you want to affect the world as, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you need to teach people about fly.io and the benefits that come alongside the baked in GPUs and its ability to be immediately transported across 35 different data centers and have instant availability and sharding of data and localized optimization, blah, 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 blah. But, that's just noise.
Yeah.
You have to make that available to somebody. And, I really enjoy that you talk through these scenarios of control, control, control. You do need to have control because if you don't have control, um, far-reaching consequences that are out of your grasp are possible. More than likely, you're going to encounter more risk the less control you have in a given value chain.
Oh yeah. And like I remember somebody was telling me that I should. Somebody asked me at I think it was one of the AI meetups, how much I use AI to help me write, and of the answer is that because of the things that I talk about and the sort of bombastic way that I present myself, most AI tools are absolutely useless. Like like most of the AI stuff tries to get, the safe, plain white bread version of a message, and I'm over here, like making comparisons in ways that the communication department of most corporations would not sanction. And like in the past I've used it to help vet ideas, but it other than like dictation technology, it doesn't really help at all.
And it's the fact that a language model or a model for imagery, videos, text, whatever, it's just a statistical representation that doesn't reason. Is this culturally sensitive? Is this ethically appropriate? Is this factually correct? Is this retrieving a valid source of information?
Yeah.
Um, right now, only humans have the capability of reasoning, and even that we do poorly, depending on the context of where you're talking about. If you're a professional comedian, you might lean on offending people or causing shock and awe to gather your message across and to leave a negative emotional impression. But I think you go for constructive and expansion of the mind, right? Like
Yeah.
you paint a seemingly innocent scenario and then you just rip people's minds into a bigger room and it's like, okay, well, here's the choices that you have presented and here are the consequences of those choices, and you now you have to pick the path that you want to follow, right?
Yeah. It's surprisingly hard to hit the balance. I'm I'm fairly sure that I've been pretty good about keeping the balance good, but knowing the statistics, I've probably messed up at some point and not known it. Like it happens. I try to minimize it, but you know, it's going to happen and it's a risk that I try to, do my best to make sure it like reduce the splash damage of, but it probably has happened at some point and I haven't been aware of it. But another thing that I do in the line of that is if I cross the line, I am told that I have crossed the line, I have a policy of just deleting that thing and apologizing for it
Now
because that's all you can do.
you're part of a particular extreme where you take full responsibility, full control, and you have contingencies in place for the actions that you take. But if we look at an inert machine that is being deployed across, just all over the world, and people are using it willy nilly for, should I get back with my boyfriend, or what's my horoscope, or what's the weather like, or should I invest in this thing? And they have no idea that this is just a inert machine that's just kind of parroting whatever sounds about right. Like it's talking to a friend that bullshits their way through life.
Yeah, there's this one thing from an IBM thing from ages ago that is coming to mind. Computers cannot take responsibility, therefore computers should not make management decisions.
It's true.
Like you can't you can't arrest ChatGPT for murder. Like that like in terms of how like ChatGPT recommending somebody self terminate or whatever, and that person actually ends up going and doing it. You can't just arrest ChatGPT and put ChatGPT in jail or put it on trial for murder. Like that doesn't make any sense. It's
I think
lots
it
of weird
depends.
things.
I think it depends on the severity of the consequence. I mean, I have a
Probably.
hammer, I have some nails, and I puncture holes in a car. And it's not
Yeah.
my car; it's somebody else's car. I'm the owner. I'm the user, the master of those tools. Therefore, I transferred my intent through them. But if
Yeah.
a tool has a certain level of sentience and your tool is like I'm consulting a patient for their annual checkup. Like, what's your weight, what's your blood pressure, what's your sugar levels,
Yeah.
and then the thing that I'm using to give them a recommendation talks about vegetables. Now we have a fucking problem. Now we have a problem that my machine is not allowing me to achieve my intent, and it's just going crazy about vegetables. Cauliflowers are good and yummy. I love carrots. Yo, what about the BMI? Is this good or bad? Yeah, I like eggplants.
Yeah.
Uh, it's funny, but who's responsible for that? The tool, the creator of the tool, the wielder of the tool.
Yeah. I have a story that I want to write out at some point in that satire of the industry series where I grew up watching Star Trek, like based on my demographics. I'm probably one of the last generations that can say that they grew up watching Star Trek the next generation. And, it's particularly optimistic view of the future. There is this one episode that has kind of stood out to me over the years because they take the crew member Data, a android crew member uh, and they put him on trial to see if he is able to refuse an order that would cause him to be subject to medical experimentation that could potentially kill him. And something about it has made me want to write what that would be in the universe of my fake startup. And the thing that really inspired me to write it was Air Canada, the airline, in in small claims court, in earnest, making the first argument for machine sapience in order to get out of paying $600. And like the absurdity of that is just because like it's small claims court. Obviously, they're going to try any argument that sticks because that's their job as defense. But just the absurdity of the first case of arguing for machine free will and the ability to dictate its own actions is because an airline did not want to pay $600 in small claims court. And I just feel like there's room for satire there because it just feels like a microcosm of the ways that the intersection there, like the intersection of the old and the new, and the old has barely adjusted to Bitcoin, and
That
like Bitcoin's been around since like what 2006.
that is funny. I'm also like, you bring up a good point. Like, for the sake of preserving cash, someone's willing to make an argument that is legally binding to the entire society, that machines have some level of sentience. So now we can claim them as dependents. So now we can marry machines. So now we can take their last names, or they can take our last names, and they have
Yeah,
their own passports. Like, it's a funny alternative universe. But what's not funny is we have legal entities hold their own identity, even though they're not natural born individuals. So
yeah,
where are we gonna go? Like, is a dried peanut gonna be able to hold property? Is the bottle cap that I have in my pocket going to be able to hold a company in the Bahamas for crypto exchange or something like that? Like, how much can I segregate myself from a fraudulent enterprise? Or how crazy can this get? It's just, it's perverse. It's
yeah.
disturbing.
I That idea of a dried peanut in your pocket being able to hold property is probably the level of absurdity that I would use for my satire universe. But um I have to write that down. That's amazing. The the other thing that I really hate is the people using the word sentient to describe artificial intelligence stuff, because sentient is actually like a shockingly terrible word for this, because the sentient, as how most people mean, is that it has, for lack of a better words, a soul. like, it gets input from the environment. It has its own it has its own processes that reason about it and create outputs. But there's some stuff there that has like ethics and morality and reason and love and emotion. But the like just asking the chat GPT button in your taskbar to write a recipe for pancakes probably doesn't have probably would be argued to be sentient, because the actual definition of sentience is can receive input and emit output, which means that congratulations, Apache, the HTTP server, is in fact sentient. So that's not really a useful definition as far as I'm concerned. I think a better word would be sapient, or like from the Latin word sapiens for wisdom. It's also it just also happens to be the same word that's used in the species name Homo sapiens, that also points at, look, we called ourselves wise scientifically. But I think
I
sapiens is a less bad word, or that we're
but
probably going to end up having some formal definition of personhood that involves like a flesh and blood human, and it's going to be very difficult to define this, especially if things like cybernetics happen. Because if you define personhood as a flesh and blood human, what happens when somebody gets a total replacement artificial heart, or they get more of their body replaced with machines that function in place of their body parts that have failed for various reasons? Would that still be a human? Like, is I don't know. There's a lot of complicated things that are I'm nowhere near qualified to even begin scratching the surface on.
the community that I'm building is called Swarm, and that is an acronym that stands for Sentient Wisdom and Artificial Reasoning Machines. Because sentience to me, as you pointed out, is inputs and outputs, but through organs that have, DNA encoding, and we have a capability to think and reason and communicate with other thinking organ machines, people, organisms, whatever. And we can share knowledge as an individual or within a collective. But a machine is a shadow of an intelligence. It's only as useful or as capable as the mind of its architect. But we
Yeah.
in ourselves, whatever the architect of our origin is, made us propagate and evolve and change over time. So it depends how you measure sentience. Otherwise, the mystery ball. Am I gonna win the lottery today? Maybe. Good enough for me, like uh, that is a very slippery definition.
Yep. It's I have no good answer for this.
It's
Like,
funny though. It's funny.
like
Uh, Apache's server is sentient. Uh,
or like my camera is sentient because I am able to press the shutter button, and that is an input that causes a process for the physical shutter to slowly expose light onto the sensor through this piece of glass, and get a result, process it, and then put it to an SD card. Is that sentience? I'd be willing to argue that if like Apache HTTPD is sentient by that definition, then so is the camera. And that would, if you have that meaning transposed to our current, to like that anything with sentience has personhood, and then congratulations, you can no longer destroy broken cameras.
so we're talking about novelty and destruction and construction and
Yeah.
transporting and transformation of ideas as a means to communicate a message.
Yeah. Or
What
the internet is sentient.
It's a series of inputs and outputs and
So when
dynamically
you
evolved.
disconnect your laptop from the internet to go to sleep, have you killed it? And this is also made especially fun by the fact that medically we don't have a solid definition of what death is. Like, we have some guesses, like, you know, People that are dead do not tend to have working hearts, so there's no discernible heartbeat. Or, there's no breathing, or there's no brain activity, or there's no regular in and out motion of the lungs, there's no muscle function, there's no blood circulation. But then there's things like artificial hearts that come in, because then you can have blood flow without a heartbeat.
Like pacemakers, yeah.
Oh, not pacemakers, like total artificial heart replacements, where they're kind of rare because uh
They're so
like
expensive to produce.
it's not just that they're expensive to produce, it's that the battery on them sucks.
Mm,
And like a person with a total artificial heart has like a 4-hour battery. So if there is a power outage and their backup power doesn't last longer than 4 hours, they're toast.
mhm.
Yeah. That's part of the reason why you don't see full artificial heart replacements very often, even though people really want to have it, because human hearts are a surprisingly scarce resource, and organ transplants are a very inexact science.
Z, if you were to give advice to somebody who's in this path of flux with technology and trying to make sense of what the creative act is and how to find their path in this world with the nuances and being able to create something with control, what would you say?
Basically, find what you can control and make peace with what you can't. I think the part of the serenity prayer that's used in, I think, Alcoholics Anonymous and other recovery groups like that, like, give me the strength to change what I can and to accept what I cannot change. Um, Part of the acceptance that I have is finding ways to use this stuff for practical things. I have been encouraging people to play with the AI tools specifically so you know how it fails. And just having control of your art in your own way and doing what you can with it. I do that with my writing as much as I can. Like, stuff that I do for work, I have less control, but that's a trade-off I'm willing to make because I like eating. And for a lot of my other stuff,
That's funny.
I mean,
It's a fact,
it's a
but
fact. Like,
it's
the
fun.
only reason that I do work is because I like eating, and in order to eat in our society, you have to work. Like, I know that's a very pithy and not like the best way to advertise oneself as a working professional, but I
That's the
I am
point.
not going to lie to you by saying, work is the thing that makes me wake up in the morning.
I love
Excitedly, I'm going to say work is the thing that makes me wake up in the
I love
morning.
I love giving value to our shareholders. My only purpose in life is to breathe and increase the quarterly profits.
To make the
Um,
line go up, yeah. But I about half the reason I got out of doing back end stuff and SRE stuff is so that I could have more of a balance to let me do my own art things on the side without without having too much of my energy sapped by the process of being able to afford to live.
mm,
And I'm lucky I ended up in a place where I'm very well off. Like, I don't want for anything that I don't need anything I can't get. Some things are more convenient than others, as all things are, but I also have the freedom to be able to take risks and experiment, and to be able to fail, because, as surprising as it sounds, failure is also critical to creative stuff. Like, failure can be bad, but it's usually good, and the trick is to have the failure happen in controlled circumstances as much as possible.
and I think you're also paving the way for this. Also, I mean, at least let me own it from my experience
Mhm.
in the context of what advice you're giving. You have to fail in order
Oh
to find what you can
God,
control,
yes.
because otherwise you will never control anything. You will never control yourself. You will
Yeah.
not control a skill set. You will not control a domain. You
You
have to.
would not believe the number of slightly out of focus images I have taken in the process of learning manual focus. Like there's tricks you can use, like setting the aperture to f8 and then putting the infinity on the right side of the hyperfocal scale, because that will get anything from like 1.6 meters out to infinity in focus. And I have some images that are like perfect, that or otherwise perfect, but they're just slightly out of focus. And I got lucky because one of those is one that I took a picture of Corey Quinn at a conference, and it was slightly out of focus, but he still loved it, and he uses it as his Twitter profile picture. He bought the rights from me.
Z, I've had a pleasure speaking with you, and even though we've already done the podcast, I'm probably going to reach out to you for more waxing
Feel free
poetic
to.
sessions. And I hope we can foster more absurdity on dried peanuts in your pocket owning NFT and the Cayman Islands and managing a portfolio of properties or diversifying the investment funds or of a whatever. I'm sure we can come up with some
Yeah. Oh,
certainly.
also for new professionals, take care of your hands. I I want to clarify this by saying that I'm fine, but I've started to get the symptoms of RSI from bad posture. Um, it can happen to anyone, and we are in a profession where it can and will happen. Take care of your hands. That is very important. Very, very important, because I'm pretty sure you like being able to afford to eat. And like, dictation stuff has advanced a lot, especially thanks to AI stuff, but it's nowhere near as fast as these meat mittens.
Now, but I think you mentioned also that you're capable not of reaching an acceptable level of productivity by leveraging those dictation tools,
Mhm.
voice to text commands or voice commands
It's really
in
useful for writing script, for writing like my conference talks, though. I learned how to talk, to write in the way that I talk, but with dictation, you don't need to, because you already talk in the way that you talk.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Z, it's been a pleasure to have you, and we're gonna have to do this again in some other modality.
Stay safe out there.